If you're an ARPG player or just an RPG player at all, you're probably familiar with resistance systems. I think resistances in Last Epoch are maybe a little bit unintuitive, but once you understand the system, they're surprisingly simple and elegantly implemented. Let's jump in. So for the most part, with resistances, what you see is largely what you get, especially early on in the game. So let's use my lightning resist as an example here. I've got 59% lightning resist. My amulet gives me 8% lightning resist. If I unequip this, my lightning resist will go down to 51%. If I re-equip it, it'll then go back up to 59%. Using that as an example, let's say this is our character here, and we are resisting at a 59% rate, and then let's say that we are taking 100 lightning damage. We'll end up taking, because we're resisting at this 59% rate, we'll end up taking 41 lightning damage. Cool, easy, simple, straightforward math. I think where this gets weird is there's this whole thing called resistance penetration, which people get hung up on. So here, let's flip back over and we'll look at the resistance penetration page. So it says right here, all enemies gain 1% of penetration per area level up to a maximum of 75%. What does this mean? So let's flip back over to our example. So let's say in this example, we're in like a level 9 zone. Because we're in a level 9 zone, all damage dealt to us will have 9% resistance penetration. So what that means here is that effectively, because this is subtracted, we are dealt 100 damage, we have 59% resistance, but it's reduced by 9%, so we actually end up taking 50% still, because 59 minus 9 is 50, 100 times 50% is 50, so we end up taking 50 damage. If we were being dealt 50 damage, we would still end up taking half of it, 25 damage. This can go all the way down to level 1, so then if we were still taking 100 damage, we'd be down to 58, so we would take, what's that, 42 damage? And that's how that scales. So from level 1 to level 75, it's just one resistance percentage down per level, and then above level 75, it stays at subtracting 75% from your resistances. Note, your resistances are capped at 75%. But what does this mean if your resistances are less than that? As an example, let's say you're in a level 50 zone and you have 0% resistance and you're being dealt 100 damage. What does that mean? So you got 100 damage coming in. Normally you just take 100 damage, but our resistances are reduced by 50, so we're actually end up then at a negative 50%. So 100, and then we say, well, we're taking another 50%, so we end up taking 150 damage, not because they're added, but because they're multiplied. So if we use 200 as an example, just to maybe make it a little bit more clear, we would then be taking 200 plus another half of it, so we would be taking 300 damage total. And that's kind of the extent of it. There's nothing too wild that's happening there once you grasp this simple subtraction system, right? So if you're at 75%, the maximum resistance, and you're in a level 75 zone and you're dealt 200 damage, you're just gonna take 200 damage. Nothing fancy. 75 minus 75, 0. You resist none of it. You take 200 damage. That's all there is to it. That's the extent of the system. Now, there are these uncapped resistances, so now you're probably wondering, and maybe you've seen some other videos or read some stuff about how resistance above 75% doesn't mean anything. It does mean something in certain situations. There are things in the game which will actually reduce your resistance, like right here, their examples are Shred, Shock, or the Marked for Death Curse. And what those things will do is they'll pull your resistance down, and what the uncapped resistance then does is it kind of replaces and fills in the gap as your resistance gets pulled down by those effects. So say, for example, we had like 100% uncapped resistance on fire, and we lost 25% resistance due to one of those effects, we would still be at 75% because our uncapped has kind of filled in the difference to make sure that we stay at 75%, the max that we can be resisting. Yeah, so what does this actually all mean? I think in other games where we're used to kind of doing math where we have really high resistances like other RPGs, like let's say something we're doing 1,000 damage to us and we could get to 99 resistance. Let's just say we could get to 99% resistance. In this case, we'd only end up taking 10 damage, right? Because like only 1% of this 1,000 is getting through. But that then means if we lose 1% of our resistance, if we go from 99% to 98%, this is doubled. Like we're then taking 20 damage. And if we go down again, we're then taking 30. Like we're taking a significant amount more of damage as we lose those super high percentage points of damage mitigation via super high resistances. But because in last Epoch we're kind of limited to the 75% system, the resistance in general isn't quite as impactful per point of resistance. Like if you're at, say, a 75% resistance of 1,000 damage, you're still going to be taking 250. And then if you go down to 74%, it's 260. Like it's a little bit more, but it's not this huge swing like we're going down from 99 to 98 and it's doubling. So I think you can kind of use that to realize that, you know, a point or two of resistance here and there, maybe being short of a cap, isn't the end of the world most of the time in last Epoch, like it might be in other ARPGs you're used to playing. And I think that's the main takeaway is like, if you can have good balanced resistances, you don't want to be taking nearly double damage, right? Like 0% in a level 75 zone, that those attacks are going to hit you super hard. But if you have 70% instead of 75%, it's not the end of the world because you're just taking 5% damage, 5% more damage. It's not like you're doubling it as you kind of shave off these really high resistance percentage points. That's where that elegance that I spoke of at the beginning of the video kind of comes into play. Is I think this makes it a little bit easier to think about resistance once you understand the system, and it just kind of works intuitively. You don't have to worry too much about like, oh, if I end up at 42% instead of 43% cold resistance, my build will be broken and I'll die all the time. And I think that about wraps it up. I hope this gives you a better grasp on resistances. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or hop in the Discord or try to catch me live on Twitch. I'll have links to both in the video description. If you have anything in game you'd like to see a video about, any systems that you think might be kind of weird or just have some questions on, please leave a suggestion as well. I'd love to hear that and kind of delve into any systems that people are struggling with. But again, thank you for watching and stay tuned.